Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Efficiency is key to any successful wheat operation, and a new tool developed at OSU aims to address that. SUNUP's Dave Deacon picks it up from here.
Well, since we've been doing the show, we've heard a lot about GreenSeeker and the technology, and it's getting smaller. It started out as a big broomstick device, and now it's more of a pocket device. And we have Dr. Brian Arnold to tell us about the growth of it, I guess.
The growth. Yeah, the original GreenSeeker started out on a broomstick, a 12-volt gel cell battery. It had a sensor that was capable of changing rates at very fast speeds in very small areas, and we have been morphing it to a smaller, more user-friendly form. This first sensor was released about 2 years ago. This was a prototype pocket sensor developed basically in a garage in Stillwater by Dr. Solis, Dr. Stone, and Dr. Ron, wanting a user-friendly sensor at a low price. This has been out in the state for about 2 years now, letting producers get their hands on it, tell us what they like, what they dislike, and had some great feedback from some really high-quality producers. Recently, we can't be more excited. For about the last year, we've been working with Trimble to develop a commercial version. And they just came out with it, with what they're terming as the GreenSeeker handheld sensor.
Nice.
So this is doing everything that large sensor did. It's taking the exact same values. It's giving us the same readings we need to make that nitrogen rate recommendation for our crops. It's just user-friendly, it's small, it's lightweight, and it's relatively cheap compared to, it's really cheap compared to the original sensor.
Okay, so talk to us about how it works.
So it works just the exact same way that the original GreenSeeker worked, where it emits red and infrared light and reads the reflectance. Under this one, you see the emittance comes from right here.
Right.
You pull the trigger and you can actually see the red light flashing. That's what's emitting the light, and this round eye up here is what's receiving that reflectance back. So it's just reading the reflectance just like the original GreenSeeker. It gives you a value on this screen to tell you what that NDVI is. When it's done, you take that number, you put it in the nitrogen rate calculator, gives you a top dress recommendation.
Okay, in some of the previous ones, you had to be, close to the ground or far away from the ground.
The first pocket sensor, because of the technology of LEDs at the time, you had to be within 20 to 24 inches of the soil, or of the crop canopy. After a couple days of sensing at about this height, the backs were getting sore of our producers.
Right.
So that was one of the biggest complaints, is that, we've got to be able to sense taller.
Right.
This sensor has a operating window of 2 to 4 feet, so it can be held anywhere at a comfortable level.
Okay.
The ergonomics, so the way they've turned this handle, actually sets it where the level, holding it level, is not that much of an issue.
Right.
You saw it earlier, it just kind of naturally fits at a flat level. That's been nice. Really like how this is working out. There was actually the first handheld sensor was on campus for a couple months, completely vetted by Dr. Ron's group. They did everything they possibly could to test it, to break it, to see how it was working, showing that it had that perfect correlation with the big sensor that we've been using for the last 10 years.
So what's the path that a person would need to do to use
Just the same with the large GreenSeeker. When they have an inlet strip in the field, and I'll say that word again, the inlet strip, it is absolutely necessary. It is extremely important to have the inlet strip out. I always recommend taking about 100 paces with the sensor through the inlet strip. They'll take the value off of this, they'll write it down.
Okay.
Then they'll walk back to their truck or their four-wheeler or whatever be it. Sensing on the outside of the inlet strip, they'll take that number, write it down, and enter it into the online calculator.
Okay.
And that's where they get the nitrogen rate recommendation.
Okay, let's talk about cost on the handheld here. Where do we stand on that?
The cost right now, the Trimble, which this is manufactured by Trimble, sold by Trimble dealers, the cost is at $495.
Wow.
Which is the original GreenSeeker somewhere above $5,000. So we've had a nice cut in
it's a
cost.
fraction.
It's a fraction of the cost of the original GreenSeeker.
Okay, so let's talk about cost per acre on getting the money out of this. Yeah.
So one of the things I've been doing for the last 10 years or so of my life is checking how well the GreenSeeker does versus conventional practice, how much money that inlet strip can make you or save you throughout the years. Over the last 10 to 12 years, we're coming up with $10 an acre every year, year in, year out, either saving nitrogen or increasing yield. At $10 an acre, 50 acres, and you've paid for the handheld sensor.
That's amazing.
In a single year.
So
that's just with wheat.
So this is an important tool to Oklahoma producers.
This is an essential tool for Oklahoma producers, and this is going to take the technology to a completely new level. This is going to take the enriched strip, put it on that next level up. This is going to be what I've referred to as in the past as a gateway technology.
Right.
This is going to lead producers from the handheld sensor to variable rate technologies. I guarantee after producers ran one of these for 5 or 6 years, they're going to look for that next level. It's just that entry. It's the light bar technology leading to auto steer.
Yeah, right.
It's just that next step, and I believe this is going to take acres of the enriched strip out the window, and we're going to see a majority of the acres in a couple of years in Oklahoma having enriched strips. Maybe 2 or 3 producers go together and buy one.
Right. That's a great idea.
Then you're at $100 to $150 a person.
Right.
15 acres and it's paid for.
There you go. Okay, Dr. Brian Arnold, thank you much. And you can find out more information on our website about the handheld GreenSeeker at sunup.okstate.edu.
Of course, once you've got your GreenSeeker, you're going to need an enriched strip to use it. And of course, that's a long, narrow strip of nitrogen applied early on, so you can see it in the fall. But of course, you could hire an applicator. If you have a big rig, you could break that out and do some small strips. But there's another way. And we heard from a viewer of a way to do it on a budget, and we had our friend Randy Taylor come in and build a similar system. Randy, show us what we've got here for putting down an enriched strip.
Well, basically all we have is just a 25-gallon tank. You can pick them up at any farm and home supply for the most part with a 12-volt electric pump on it. And so you set that up and basically just put a spray boom on the back of your four-wheeler, and then you've got a applicator.
All right, now let's talk about some of the important components actually making something like this work. Obviously, I mean, the tank's fairly straightforward, but the pump, what do you need to think of when you buy a pump? Well,
the first thing you have to think of is how much you're going to need to apply. Typically with an enriched strip, we're probably looking at 100 plus pounds of nitrogen, per acre is what we put out. So roughly, UAN, if you, 28% is about 3 pounds per gallon of nitrogen. Okay. So you have to come back and think, okay, how much do I need, of the nitrogen to get my strip out? And so now we've got to size our pump based on being able to put out and supply the amount that we want and still be able to drive at a certain speed.
All right, so it's a little bit of figuring there. Now let's talk about nozzles and some options on what you put down here. Obviously we have a fairly complicated rig here, but is that necessary?
No, we don't need this. And this is one of basically a research rig. It's 10 foot wide, and so they've got different nozzles that they can select as they go to the field. But really what we're talking about, if you're going to be putting out UAN as an enriched strip, is you want to stream it on in some form or fashion. We've got stream bars that we can use that will go on to our nozzles. So if we look at something like this, then once we put this, if I can get it on, there's a little stream bar on there. Then now the nitrogen's coming out in streams here, or our other choice is of several is just small nozzles that have 3 streams, and so now
right.
it's going to come out kind of in a little finger pattern,
right,
and down. So, but the key is concentrating. You don't want to use a flat fan or something like that and atomize the nitrogen, because you'll end up losing more of it.
Okay. Now, aside from that, we've got a simple boom. Any other key components we need to be thinking about as you attach this onto your four-wheeler here?
No, the main thing is I'd get it away from the four-wheeler as much as possible, because we're dealing with a pretty corrosive substance.
Right.
And so, if you look at what we've got on this gets used a lot for nitrogen on plots, and so a lot of it has just been rebuilt because the rest of it rusted out.
Okay.
And so I would be, when you start looking at the rack on your four-wheeler and how you mount stuff, the further you can keep the nitrogen away from the parts of it that you like,
right.
The better off you're going to be. Now the fenders and stuff, they're all going to be, they're plastics, you don't have to worry about that, but mainly it's the rack and the metal components you're going to have on there. So maybe stay out of the wind too when you're trying to put them out would be another thing that you could do to try to keep that nitrogen off of your four-wheeler.
Let's talk about cost. When we talk about reasons for wanting to do this, I'd say first off, this is a lot cheaper than even maybe hiring out an applicator a couple times over a few years?
Yeah, these are probably going to be in the range of you know, $100 to $150 depending on what you get. The first key is to make sure you got a pump with plenty of capacity though. Okay. You know, that's going to be the first key when you start looking at those. Biggest cost? There's going to be more cost if you look at these, and so you know, this one in particular I think is like 5 gallon a minute. At zero pressure, and that's the thing you have to remember. That's an open flow, so that's not putting it through a nozzle, and so it's going to be somewhat less than 5 gallons a minute. And so that's probably going to be on the low side. If you start looking at some of these and they're the 2 or 3 gallon a minute pumps, you're not going to put out a lot of nitrogen, at least at a very high speed. You can run slower. And that's the other key to remember when you put together a system like this. It's a straight pressure-based system. And so it's going to have a flow rate, and your application rate then is going to depend on how fast you drive.
Okay. And that leads to the next question. Of course, you give up some things in terms of the measurements and then the precise controls. So how do you use this system to make sure you're putting down the right amount and that you know what you're putting out?
Well, the first thing is you know, you can look at the nozzle flow rate equations for it, or you can just get a nozzle book, you know, and we'll say, and so, you know, if I wanted to put out, you know, say, make it easy, 105 pounds per acre of nitrogen, and I said the factor was 3, well, now we're looking at 35 gallon an acre of nitrogen that we would put out. And so now we can select everything based off of that 35 gallon an acre, depending on our nozzle spacing, you know, 20 inches, how fast we drive, and that would tell us what size of nozzle we would need to be able to do that.
All right. Well, Randy, thanks for showing us around. This is a great application.
You bet.
One of the consequences of the recent drought that we've had here in Oklahoma is vitamin A deficiency is a potential problem that we could have going into the fall and winter months, because the primary source of vitamin A is beta-carotene, which is available in green growing plants. Well, in many cases, our pastures are brown, they're dry. The hay that is often being fed to cattle is hay that perhaps has been stored for over a year. And vitamin A just doesn't stay in hay that has been stored for an extended period of time. So when you put all of these situations together, then we have the potential to have very low, if not deficient levels of vitamin A going into our cows as we go into the winter time. If we're lucky enough to get enough rain to get some wheat pasture, then that will be a good source of vitamin A if we can use that as a supplement for these cows this fall and winter. But if we have the situation on our place where we don't have wheat pasture and we're going to have to feed hay that's either been stored for a long period of time or perhaps hay from a source from some other state, and we don't know how long that hay has been harvested, then I think we want to plan to use some supplemental source of vitamin A for these cattle as we go into the winter. A couple of ways of getting vitamin A into them. Cows can either be injected with about 1 million international units of vitamin A, and that will usually help them for somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 months, because vitamin A can be stored in the liver for several months. Another way of providing vitamin A is any range cube or supplement that you might be mixing to feed to these cattle. Plan to have the feed mixed to where it contains about 30,000 international units of vitamin A per head per day for dry pregnant cows, and then after those cows calve, they should be getting enough to amount to about 50,000 international units of vitamin A per head per day. Vitamin A deficiency can cause some problems such as blind calves when they're born, very weak calves, and can also have an effect on the reproductive outcome for next year's calf crop. So it is important to pay attention to vitamin A, especially in this drought year. We think that it's a good idea to think through, are your cattle getting enough vitamin A this fall and winter after this drought, so that we don't have potential problems at calving time or in breeding seasons next summer. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
The USDA released the latest WASDE numbers this week. Kim Anderson, our grain marketing specialist, joins us now. And Kim, just give us a general overview.
Well, that's pretty easy to do. There just wasn't much in the report. They didn't change the wheat U.S. numbers at all. On the world wheat situation, they lowered production a little bit, lowered ending stocks a minute amount, no impact on wheat prices. On corn, the production was above the expectations, pre-release expectations, and ending stocks were above pre-release expectations. Corn prices were initially down a little bit, but they're leveling out. It's just really a null event on this report.
Okay, not much really at all. What's the market kind of looking at now?
Well, I think the market's just pulling out the usual suspects. Market's looking for some direction, and there's really nothing out there right now to change prices. Kansas City, I think that December contract's going to continue to trade between that $8 and 69 cents and $9.57, that sideways pattern. It's really narrowed up about to a plus or minus 25 from $9. Corn, again, has no reason to go higher. It may work just a little bit lower. There's just not much information out there. I will say that one report said that the corn yields and production is coming in a little higher than expected.
Okay, also kind of the world factors, we always talk about that, kind of more of the same there too?
More of the in the world, Australia, it's dry in Western Australia, we knew that. They're talking about Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, when they're going to run out of wheat for export, talking about, they're even dragging up the European Union economic situation. They're saying, do they have a handle on it? And they're talking about QE3.
Okay, and let's switch gears and talk about crop insurance now, the price getting set for wheat.
Well, the price is set on Friday. It's about $8.74, right in that range. We'll know the middle of next week. And of course, sign up is by October the 1st.
Okay, and finally, last word of marketing advice for our producers?
I've been telling producers to make decisions that'll let them sleep at night. If like on the crop insurance, if they don't have insurance and it doesn't rain and they're losing sleep, they're going to do something stupid that's going to cost them more than what the premium would be for that. Same for selling the wheat. If you lose sleep over that decision, go ahead and pull the trigger on some.
Okay, Kim Anderson, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Hi, welcome to Shop Stop. Today we want to talk about how to cut metal as far as orienting it relative to our saw.
Correct. There are certain positions that you need to have, like structural steels, to cut them properly to save wear and tear and all your consumables that you have.
If you're just looking at a metal, abrasive cutoff saw, if you look at just a piece of channel iron, usually you'd want to put that with either the channel facing down or potentially even up in this arrangement if you can get it clamped right. But the big thing is you don't want to be with the channel facing up, because then you've got to cut through this little flat part here, and it's a lot harder for that saw blade to cut through that as opposed to sitting like this when it's cutting through it at an angle now.
And the same thing with angle iron. For example, if you're, depending on the vise and your setup, if you've got it possible, you want to cut your angle iron in this direction with your blade coming down on top. And most of your saw blades, like for your horizontal saw blades, on the back, they have a little diagrams of where the saw cut should be depending on what type of structural steel you're trying to cut. So if you look at this angle iron, you want it angled like we were showing you there. If you run an H-beam, like so. So that's some tips on using a chop saw or a band saw to cut structural shapes.
That's it this week on Shop Stop. We'll see you next time.
It's been a quiet end of the summer for the livestock markets, and here to discuss that is our old friend Daryl Peel. Daryl, this time last year it had been kind of a chaotic time. We'd had a lot of sell-offs in the market. There was a lot of reaction to last year's drought. What are we seeing in contrast this year?
This year's drought is really quite a lot different than last year's drought, and probably a little more typical in that the drought effects have accumulated over the summer, but we started with a spring, we had some moisture, we grew some forage, we made a little hay, and so, we haven't had the kinds of summer sell-offs that we had last year because conditions haven't gotten as bad as quickly this year. But if you look at where we are right now, conditions are very much as bad as they were this time last year. Oklahoma has about almost 80% of all pasture and range rated as poor to very poor. Producers are reporting that water supplies are now becoming critically low in some cases. So we're going to face some of the things in the next few weeks that we really haven't faced this summer compared to last summer.
All right, so then heading into the fall, what should producers be doing?
Well, again, partly because we sold off last year, we haven't needed to liquidate cattle as early this year. But I think if producers really need to sit down right now and look at, realistically at their forage supplies, their hay supplies, and their water supplies, and think about whether they need to, go ahead and do some early culling or some early weaning. First of all, get those calves off, perhaps, maybe some early culling, get some of those cows off, and make sure that we, stretch the available water and feed as far as we can. Really, the point here is that producers need to be planning now for what conditions are going to be like for them in, say, January or February. They need to be thinking ahead, and they've still got a little time to do some drought management things that are earlier this fall rather than waiting until later.
All right, let's talk about market effects then. What's really going to happen due to the drought conditions now as we head into the fall?
Well, the one thing that happened, because the drought was much bigger nationwide this year, we did see more market impact on prices during the summer, and we've actually recovered from some of that because much of those effects around the country have passed their peak at some point. However, I do think both in Oklahoma and in other parts of the country, producers may begin to realize, particularly with respect to the cow herd, that they do need to do some additional culling. So we could see a fairly strong, culling market this fall. Cull cow prices usually reach their seasonal low in late October, early November, and that could be a bit more pronounced, or at least very seasonal this year. So again, if a producer looks at that and says, I'm going to need to get rid of some cows, they probably want to do it earlier this fall in the next few weeks rather than waiting until later when everybody else may be doing it.
All right, good information as always. Darrell Peel, Oklahoma State University's Livestock Marketing Specialist.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet Weather Report. We use a lot of numbers to talk about weather. Those numbers allow us to monitor real-world impact. One of the newest Oklahoma Mesonet products to do this is the new Cattle Comfort Advisor. This new index uses weather science to better estimate the environmental impact on cattle. The index combines impacts of air temperature, sunlight, wind, and relative humidity to better estimate the comfort level of cattle. On Wednesday evening, September 12th, a cold front was moving into the Panhandle. An air temperature map from 10 minutes after 6 showed air temperatures for most of the state were close to 90. In the Panhandle, air temperatures were in the 70s near Beaver and Guyman, with Boise City at 64 degrees. How did that compare to the Cattle Comfort Index values? For cattle near Boise City, it felt more like 50 degrees due to strong, gusty north winds. That's 14 degrees cooler than the air temperature of 64. In the main part of the state, where the winds were out of the south and lighter, the cattle comfort level for the most locations was in the mid-80s, 5 degrees cooler than the air temperature. A wind map shows the areas of stronger winds in the Panhandle, colored orange, in contrast to the lighter southerly winds, colored green and yellow. A Keach-Byram Drought Index map from Wednesday, September 12th, shows how the lack of rain over the first 12 days in September kept soils dry. The index values are high, with many in the 600 to 700 range. Higher is drier with the Keach-Byram Drought Index scale. The maximum dryness value is 800. A 10-day rainfall map from September 2nd through the 12th shows how little rain fell across the majority of Oklahoma during that time. Most of the blue areas on the map received less than 1/4 of an inch of rain in early September. The precipitation needed map, based on the Palmer Drought Index, indicates Oklahoma needs 6 to 9 inches of rain in the west, the orange-colored areas, 9 to 12 inches in central Oklahoma, colored red, and 12 to 15 inches in eastern Oklahoma. Those areas are purple. That's why one good storm helps the drought situation, but doesn't end a drought or the concern. To end a drought, you need multiple storms with good amounts of rain to come through. Last week, we looked at a graph of 2-inch soil temperatures for Apache, Oklahoma. A graph for this week from Apache shows how the soil temperature at 2 inches cooled from a high of 105 degrees on September 5th to a high of 95 degrees 3 days later on the 8th with cooler air temperatures. Rain will cool bare soils down even more, so the rain helps in two ways: critical moisture to germinate wheat seed and the added benefit of soil cooling. Thanks for joining us for this week's Mesonet Weather Report.
Finally today, a pretty remarkable milestone, 50 years of service, all aimed at helping us better understand insects. With his signature cup of coffee in hand, Don Arnold enjoys his retirement party with his colleagues. He spent 50 years on the OSU campus in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. So naturally, it seemed fitting to ask him about his favorite kind of bug.
Well, I like beetles better than most other kinds.
Why is that?
But just about it, I don't know. I don't have any idea why I got that way. I like grasshoppers too.
Don's a survey entomologist and spent many years traveling the state, and it turns out, training a lot of bosses.
And now he's figured out that with the current department head, he has to give up. You know, some people are just not trainable. So we're real proud of Don and the time that he served as survey entomologist and the curator for our museum, and he's done an excellent job in that capacity.
In fact, the Insect Museum is what Don says he'll miss most about coming to campus each day.
Just coming up here and sitting around in the museum with all the bugs, really.
Our best wishes, Don, and thank you for your service to OSU and Oklahoma farmers. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime online at sunup.okstate.edu. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time at SUNUP.